Hi guys, so I am here today to do a tag video and I really hadn't anticipated even filming a video today, but my friend Ashley over at A Frolic Through Fiction tagged me to do the Bookternet All-Stars Charity Challenge. Sorry, I could not memorise that, which was created by Rachael Marie, and I adore both of their channels, so please do go and check them out. They'll be linked down below. And Rachael created this tag with the intention of raising some money for a COVID-19 relief charity. The charity hasn't been decided yet, but they're currently fundraising, and then a charity will be decided from like a pre-selected, you know, checked over list of. And there's two ways that Rachael is using this to raise money. One is that for everybody who does this tag, she donates €1 up to 75 euros, of course. And then anybody else who is able to, who has a few spare dollars, pounds, euros or whatnot, can donate to the fund themselves as well. And all of that will be linked down below. So I was very happy to be tagged and have the opportunity to take part and spread Rachael's fundraiser a little bit wider. So if you haven't heard of it yet, you have now. And also, like I said, Rachael and Ashley's channels are both fantastic and might give you a little bit of escapism right now, so do check them out. But what this challenge is all about is basically asking you, have you read those popular books? So it's a selection of both books / series and authors who are booktube darlings, you know, the ones that you hear about before you start booktube, the ones that you hear about all the time when you've started booktube, that you feel like you have to read to be involved in all the hype with, and that you can't really escape no matter what corner of the internet you turn to. And whether you've read them, if you haven't read them, why not? Did you DNF them? I'm not gonna lie, having watched Rachael and Ashley's videos, this is going to be a long list of authors that I DNF'd. Not all of them, but quite a few. I also kind of felt a bit like a booktube senior citizen when Rachael was describing this tag, because a lot of these books weren't out when I started booktube, so they weren't books that I felt like I needed to read when I first started, but I've certainly seen them talked about and certainly have heard all the names and titles even if I haven't tried them. But if you're looking for all of the books and authors in one place, then Rachael has created a graphic which you can also use on Twitter or Instagram stories to share your own results in. And without further ado, let's find out how much of these popular books and authors I have read. So first up is Angie Thomas. I actually had to write down the authors on a separate list because I realised that I have no idea what any of these authors look like, even though I have heard all their names. So the first one is Angie Thomas, and I have actually read half of one of her books. I have read half of The Hate U Give, and this was not like a DNF for me. I thought the half of The Hate U Give I read was amazing, but I read it when I was not in the best like space mentally and was having struggles with my own life, and a lot of books just got waylaid, especially books on like quite serious contemporary topics like this one. So I never went back to it, although it's always been in the back of my mind to check out. However, from what I would read, I would highly recommend it. And to be honest, I think it's amazing that a book about police violence and racism has garnered so much attention, because it is such a contemporary important issue. I just, like I said, read it at the wrong time, so never got around to finishing it, which is true of lots and lots of books. We then have the Shatter Me series by Tahir, and I'm not gonna lie, I've never read the series and I've never even had the inclination to pick it up. I have heard of it, I've seen people talk about it. It's not that I've actively avoided it, I've just never really developed a fancy for it, so that's kind of all I have to say about that one. We then get into more controversial territory with the author Leigh Bardugo. So I have read, I think, like a quarter of one of Leigh Bardugo's books, which was the first in her Grishaverse series, and I hated it. I think I was actually vlogging when I was reading that book, so you might have seen me talk about it and DNF it, but the girl hate. I feel like this book is of a era in YA that I think has sort of died down, and I'm really pleased has died down, where there's a lot of girl hate, a lot of judgment towards other women and girls in the literature, and just some kind of like more unhealthy attitudes and depictions of like women and women's interactions that I've just don't enjoy in literature, and I find very like cliched. So I could not get into this book. I felt so frustrated, and that is just one of my massive pet peeves, so I never finished it. I really didn't like it. However, I do still want to try more of Leigh Bardugo. Like I said, I think this is of an era. It's an older book, whereas I've heard amazing things about Six of Crows. I know people mentioned that it doesn't really have that girl hate element that the other book I read did. And I also am interested in reading The Ninth House, which is her adult dark academia fantasy book, and have a proof copy of that. So Leigh Bardugo is definitely an author I plan to try again in the future. I'm definitely here to give her another chance, but I did not like that really popular series that everybody else does, so that's a that's that. Next up is another one that divides the masses, and that is the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, and I fall on the enjoyment side of this. I really like this trilogy. I enjoyed the sort of like fast-paced and dark nature of it. I really liked how dark a YA fantasy it was, and I kind of really loved how messy our protagonist was. I think it's quite a skill to write like a really messy but still interesting main character, one who's like going through a lot of stuff, who isn't necessarily always the most likable or endearing, who is essentially full of rage and anger, and still capture a reader's imagination and create a relatable character at the same time. So I really enjoyed that. I can completely see why not everybody loves this trilogy. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend it to everybody, but I went in with an open mind, no real expectations, and really just like got caught up in the whole world. So I'm like here for those books. We then have the Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco, which I have not read but really want to, which is something Ashley also mentioned in her video. I don't own a copy, but I keep almost picking it up. I think it sounds brilliant and like the kind of fantasy book I would absolutely love, so I'm definitely planning on reading that in the future. And then for an author we have Victoria Schwab, or V.E. Schwab. I think she writes under both those names depending on whether it's adult YA children books that she's writing. I have never read any V.E. Schwab. She seems to write quite a diverse array of books and has been for quite a long time. I have friends on the internet, IRL, who love her and are always recommending her to me, and she is kind of on my hypothetical author TBR. I've never really prioritised her work, but I'm certainly interested in picking it up and do want to try some of it. I currently have on loan from my friend Ailsa her Dark Duet, I think it's called, but it's in London, so obviously I can't read it just now while I'm in Edinburgh. And I'm also interested in her children's middle grade series because I know it's set in Edinburgh, and that's always like quite fun for me as someone from Edinburgh. Let me know if you think there's any books in particular you think I should start with. We then have the Cinder series by Marissa Meyer. Now this is one that was very popular when I first started BookTube like 8 years ago. It was everywhere, everyone was talking about it, and I did give into the hype. I did feel like, oh, I need to check out this author, and I started book one and just gave up on it. This isn't like with the Leigh Bardugo book. I don't have any like vivid memories of why I didn't get into it. I don't think there was anything particularly irritating to me as a reader. I just didn't find it that engaging and just never continued on with the book, and now I think it's been so many years that I don't think I ever will return to it. It just didn't click with me, basically. The next author is Adam Silvera, another one I just haven't read, who's never really sparked like a keen interest for me. None of his books really sound like my cup of tea, so I've just never gotten around to him. Don't know if I ever will, to be honest. We then have another book that I feel like, yes, I have been hearing about since the first day I came to BookTube, and that is Cassandra Clare. This is another one, like with Cinder, that I did try to read when I first started BookTube because I felt like everyone was talking about her, everyone was talking about her books. They had so much popularity and hype that I felt like I needed to try them, but I just could not get into it. I can't even remember the title of the book I tried to read by her. It's so meaningless and takes up so little space in my brain that although I know I tried to read her, I don't know what I tried to read. I don't really know how I felt about it, except that I didn't care enough to continue. So apologies to those of you who adore Cassandra Clare, I just never got into her. One of the few adult books on this list actually is next, and that's the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Another one I haven't read and I've just never really felt compelled to read. I know people love this, but part of me also thinks that hype would really affect my reading of it. It's the kind of book that I would have such high expectations to going in, but I'd be afraid wouldn't live up to them. It sounds interesting, but there's plenty of other sort of like queer historical fiction I have more interest in, to be honest. We then finally arrive at another author who I have read a full book by, and that is Laini Taylor. I read, is it called Daughter of Smoke and Bone? I only read it like last year or the year before, so it wasn't actually that long ago. It took me a while because this is one that again has been hyped for years and years, and I never like really planned on reading, but saw in my library again, I think it was last year, so thought, hey, do you know what? I'm gonna give that a shot, a little bit of like classic YA fantasy. And I enjoyed it well enough. I thought it was quite an interesting concept and storyline. I felt it was quite compelling and I like powered through. But I have just never fancied continuing on with the series. Like, I don't think I'm that invested in the storyline or the characters that I want to find out what happens to them. Like, enjoyed the book but don't really care about what happens next. And I think in part that's because the actual makeup of the characters and the story and the world changes quite drastically at the end of book 1, so my expectations for book 2 make me think I would not enjoy it as much as book 1. And to be honest, like with anything, there's just other books I fancy more, so I don't know, I probably won't ever finish this series, but again, I say that, who knows, maybe one day it'll just like really capture my attention again and I'll feel like, yes, okay, I must return. I can't rule out anything. But again, I'd like to repeat, that's not actually a criticism of the book. I thought it was a pretty decent book actually. I think I gave it 4 stars, so there you have it. We then had the Illuminae Chronicles, which is one that I know Ashley loves. I've seen Becca talk about it a lot as well, but I've just never read. I know this isn't the point of the video, but I feel like I'm failing. I haven't read Illuminae and I've never really had the inclination to, which seems to be pretty true of a lot of these. If I haven't DNF'd them, then I've never really fancied them. So there we go. But yeah, I don't know if I'm like mad for YA sci-fi. I love YA fantasy, but I don't know if YA sci-fi is as much my cup of tea. And I'm not like crazy about like multi-formatted books, which other people love about this series. So those things that other people rave about don't necessarily appeal to me. But if you think that I would really enjoy that series, it's not one I've entirely ruled out, so let me know if you think it's worth giving a shot. We then have the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. Again, haven't read, have never really fancied reading, to be honest. We then returned to territory of books I DNF'd and didn't like with Sarah J Maas. So I haven't read a lot of her books. I know she has tons and tons of series and people love her and I think that's awesome. But the book I read by her I really did not get on with and gave up on about, again, a quarter or a third of the way through. It was called A Court of Thorns and Roses, I believe. It's the one that's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and I love a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but I don't know, it's hard to pinpoint what it was, but I really just did not get on with it. I didn't really like the characters I was reading about. I wasn't mad about the setup or the relationships between the sisters. They just weren't dynamics that I was really interested in reading about, so I DNF'd that one. We then have Ember in the Ashes, which is a book I really want to read. I think this book sounds phenomenal. It's a fantasy book, first in a series, and it's like high up on my fantasy TBR. I haven't read it yet, but I have like high hopes for it, so I really hope I do enjoy it. Then we have Seanan McGuire for another author, and this is one that I have mixed feelings about again. I've read 2.5 books by Seanan McGuire. I think, don't come for me in the comments, that Every Heart a Doorway is overhyped. I didn't love it. I thought it was like fine. It was like a middle of the road book, and that's not because the concept isn't brilliant. I think the concept is phenomenal. I think it was far too short a book to explore the concept and the murder mystery plot in it. Like, too much tried to happen in too short a book for me. However, the sequel, which is also kind of a prequel to Every Heart a Doorway, called Down Among the Sticks and Bones, I thought was far better. I thought that worked much better in the space it occupied, it gave me background on the world, and I really, really enjoyed it. So after I read that one, I thought, well, continue on, read book 3, which returns to the time period following book 1, and I DNF'd it. I didn't like book 3 at all. At least I got through book 1. I did not like book 3, could not get into it, just did not have the qualities I look for in a book for whatever reason. However, just because I don't love that series that everybody else does, doesn't mean I don't think I might love Seanan McGuire. I'd love to read some of her books written under her pen name Myra Grant, is it? Which is more of the horror side of things. Really, really interested in those books. And I'm also really interested in some of the stuff she writes under Seanan McGuire. I'd really like to read Middle Game. I think that sounds brilliant. And I know she has quite a lot of like urban fantasy series that a friend of mine, Elsa, who's really into that subgenre, adores and always highly recommends. So I think she writes so many different things, and a lot of things that are much longer than the Every Heart a Doorway novellas are, so I might get on with better and have every intention of checking out more of her stuff in the future, because I think her imagination's fascinating. I just did not fall in love with that series that everybody else seems to have. 2 more books, and the first one is the Poppy Wars. This is one that I am interested in. I haven't prioritized it because I hear there's a lot or very explicit depictions of sexual violence in it, and I've mentioned this before, but my PhD research focuses on sexual violence. I read a lot of non-fiction about sexual violence, and therefore it's a rare occasion that I want to read fiction with sexual violence. I think it's so important that it's represented in literature. I think it's so important that it's represented in YA. I think it's so important that it's represented in all fiction. But because it's something that I read about a lot, it's not necessarily something I want to read in my escapist fantasy. So that's kind of where I'm at with Poppy War. I do plan on reading it one day, but it's just not kind of made it up there to the top of the list yet. Then last but not least is not a fantasy book, which I feel like a lot of these are, and that's To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. This book doesn't sound like my cup of tea in the slightest. It's a YA contemporary series, and it's also had Netflix movies made out of it. I know people love this, and I think maybe if I'd read it as a teenager I would have liked it when I was much more into like YA teen contemporaries. But I just don't really get on with that subgenre now. I guess just because I'm not like a teenager and it doesn't have the like fantastical or otherworldly elements that I appreciate about other YA. It's just something I'm not as interested in reading. And I think that's entirely down to personal preference as opposed to what I think the book might offer. I think the book's probably brilliant. I know some people I really trust love it. I just don't think I would enjoy it that much. However, I have certainly debated picking it up just to try something a little bit different, but I've just never quite taken that leap. So those are all the books and authors, a lot of names that I knew of, even if I hadn't read. I can completely see where this list came from. These are, you know, absolute booktube darlings, but obviously ones I haven't actually read or finished a lot of. I would love to know if you're surprised by any of my answers, or if you think I should prioritise some of the books or authors I haven't read yet. What would your answers be? Do either leave them down in the comments down below. I'd love to chat about these kind of like popular hyped books with you. Or please do film this video and spread a little bit of awareness. The links to Rachel's channel and all of the ways that you can donate to the relief fund will be linked down below. Of course, I mean, all the information will be in the description box, and I hope that you're all doing the best that you can be with everything going on. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys.